Hello, everybody. This is Mallory Flowers on behalf of Jennifer Shells and Associates, and we are coming to you live from Washington, D.C., and welcome to our webinar Wednesday series. Our webinars are held every Wednesday in 2018 at 12 p.m. Eastern Time and also at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And our speakers range from accountants to attorneys and other industry professionals. The full schedule for the rest of the year is on our website underneath the webinar tab. In the interest of time, we do not take questions. So our speaker's contact info is posted on the last slide. If you have any questions, please contact the speaker directly. The recordings are on our website underneath the archived webinar tab, as well as on our YouTube channel. All right, this is just a quick blurb about us. Jennifer Shells and Associates is based in downtown Washington, D.C., and we help both product and service companies with federal contracting. Our clients are domestic and foreign, defense contractors and civilian, and our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles, including the GSA schedule. We can help you with proposal writing and post-award contract administration, and more information about our services and upcoming events can be found on our website. And this is our annual federal contracting fiscal New Year soiree that we are having Monday, October 22nd at the Kennedy Center. You can find more information on the link that is on the slide or also on our website. All right, so we're going to go ahead and dig into today's presentation, and our speaker is Jenny Clark. You can learn more about her background here. And our presentation today is Accelerate Your Growth by Targeting Your Pricing. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Mallory. So this is Jenny Clark with Solvability, and we focus on helping people figure out how to accelerate and scale their business and in the cost and pricing area. It's also related to any kind of accounting systems, because if you don't have those things right, you're really not going to be able to move out as fast as you want to. So go ahead and start with the next slide, if you would, Mallory. What I want to go over today is that winning contracts with competitive pricing is more than just a few formulas. Sure, I can give you a formula. It would work for today. But what I want to do is head you down a path to understand that methodology and understand when we need to talk again about different rate structures. Because your company grows, you go in new directions. Also want to talk today about understanding the indirect cost pools, which are basically fringe benefits, overhead cost, and G&A, or general and administrative. What those make up of, how they work. I also want to talk to you a little bit about pricing templates that can trap you. Over the last few years, I've seen so many pricing templates that are embedded in proposals, and I look at them and I go, oh my gosh, it's kind of wrong. How do we adapt it to get the result they're asking for, but provide the data we need and not make a bad pricing mistake? I'm going to talk to you real briefly about what I call left coast versus right coast overhead methods. There's two common ways to calculate overhead. One of them includes the fringe on direct labor in the pool or numerator of the calculation. The other one puts that same fringe on direct labor in the base for calculation. And both are correct. Different reasons for doing different ones, but mathematically it should end up the same at the end. But I do want to emphasize that. And then the last thing I want to leave you with is our solvability rate and pricing model that I've developed over the 30 years I've been working in federal contracting, because every time I turn around and working with companies on their indirect rates, I create for them a model that we use as a spreadsheet that then we use to implement inside their accounting system as they're growing. Next slide, Mallory. So the first question is, what are the costs that we have to cover? You're getting ready to bid a federal contract. And in your head, you're closing your eyes and thinking about, what are we delivering? Well, number one, we're delivering direct labor if the case is you're providing services to the federal government, as most of the companies that I'm working with, they're doing engineering services, professional services, or IT services. Within the proposal, we're going to identify who's going to do the work, what their labor category or other qualifying level is, how much their pay rate is, and how many hours. If we get that right, we've got the best start on our proposal that we could. We want to take into account the technical hours and the workforce that's performing that work. Sometimes you're even going to include new hires into that calculation in order to balance out or actually pull down the billing rates that you're going to end up with. But we know that if we win this contract, we're going to have this team of people. Here's what we're going to pay them. Here's how many hours we're going to work. That's our base direct labor cost. The next thing that we have to think of is those people didn't just sign up to get a paycheck. They're expecting to get holiday pay. They're expecting to get paid time off, annual leave, sick leave, jury duty, bereavement pay, military pay, whatever your benefit plan calls those out. Those are called paid absences. And we need to include that as part of our fringe benefit cost. We've also got payroll taxes, Social Security, Medicare, federal unemployment tax, state unemployment tax, and many states have additional taxes that they've imposed. We've got to cover all of those. If I was picking a number out of the air, I'd say 8 to 10%. We also might have workers' comp insurance, and we would likely have 401k. The last element of fringe is called group benefits. That's the company paid portion of health insurance. That's group life insurance. Any of those benefits that you're providing to your employees, that workforce is performing on that proposal, on that contract work, all of those costs have to be calculated. And if I'm pulling a number out of the air on that one, I use a 30% for fringe. It could be a little bit lower if your benefit plans are less rich. Overhead. That is the support cost of the technical workforce. Overhead support costs for your technical workforce. Okay, you've got IT guys. They have certifications. You might have to buy them specialized software. You might have to be sending them for additional testing. You might have spent a fair amount of money recruiting those people. Maybe you've got background checks. Maybe you have sign-on bonuses. Maybe you're working with an engineering workforce and they have a different set of tools that they need, a different set of softwares. Or you might have a database that they can access that you kind of have developed as your corporate tool to help you do the best at what you can do. Overhead is the support cost of the technical workforce. So anything that you need for your people to deliver to your customer is likely to be overhead. G&A, general and administrative, that's the corporate expense. That's the back office, executives, human resources, accounting. Those type of costs are all part of your G&A or general and administrative expense. Then you've got profit. And also out of your profit is going to come some coverage for costs that the government calls unallowable cost. Doesn't mean you can't spend it, but it means that, hey, we're not going to let you throw that in your G&A and charge us for it. You're going to have to put it in your profit and pay for it yourselves because we're not getting into that game of how you manage your financials. So the costs we have to cover, the cost of the employee, their fringe benefits, any support costs related to them, a factor for the fact that we've got corporate people that have to run the systems to make this work, and then profit. Next slide, Mallory. What I'm going to give you in a minute is a little bit of an example of this from my solvability rate and pricing model. I have spreadsheets. If you want to follow up with me after this, I can send you some examples of the spreadsheets. In this class, all I can do is show you screenshots, so I'll do my best to go over those with you. We're going to talk about a labor multiplier. Some people call that a factor. Some people call it burdening labor rates, whatever. There's different ways to do it. But we're going to say if I pay an employee $50 an hour and I know my labor multiplier is 1.7, then the $50 an hour times 1.7 is how much I should bill that person out at in order to recover all my cost. Every single target market with federal contracting kind of has a going rate for what that would be, and that going rate for this labor multiplier covers your fringe benefits at 30%, your overhead, the biggest chunk, because that could be anywhere from 2 to 5%, all the way up to 30, 40% if you're providing people in your facilities. And then your G&A cost, which is your corporate or administrative expenses, normally running from 10 to 15%, depending on your company size and your efficiency. And as your company grows, you've got to find a way to drive down some of those rates, specifically the G&A rate, if you want to be a winning, growing contractor. I'm going to talk to you about a wrap rate calculator. Again, I can't throw out complete formulas, but I will give you an idea of the methodology and the structure for this wrap rate calculator. So I'm going to show you my favorite example of that. This tool that I've developed, if I've got a labor multiplier and a wrap rate calculator, I can actually real quickly come up with a top line proposal estimate. So I'm going to show you that. And then I've got a couple others that I'm actually not going to be able to show you the spreadsheet shots on. It was like too much data on one slide about indirect rates and labor categories. Next slide, Mallory. This is what I call a labor multiplier. Different people call it different things. So whenever you're in a meeting and people are throwing out these terms, write them down. And a lot of times you'll go back and talk to that person after the meeting and find out what they're talking about. And it's what you called something else at your old company. Terminology is so critical in this stage. Here I'm giving a simple example, and you could actually type this little spreadsheet on your desktop and set it up so we can change those percentages that I've got showing is 30% for fringe, 5% for overhead, and 15% for G&A. And then whenever you're doing a bid and you need to know how you can get down to a wrap rate that's below 1.7, you could play around with those percentages. Just make sure that you have a plan for how you're going to cover that cost. But the percentages people play with the most usually is they'll reduce their fee or they'll reduce their G&A. Let me just walk you through it. What I did is in the column that says cost buildup, I put a 1. That means for every dollar of direct labor, I'm going to use this mathematical model. So this is kind of like your recipe. And for me, if I had a special recipe, it'd probably be for something I really like eating, like chocolate fudge. And everybody's got their different one. So think about this as your recipe. I'm using a 30% fringe rate. In this little math model, what I do is take the 1.0 times the 30%, and that's how I come up with the 0.3 in the cost buildup column. What that's saying is I'm spending $1 on the direct labor pay rate. I'm spending 30 cents to provide them the fringe benefits. The next calculation is for overhead. A 5% overhead would be a really low overhead. This would mean that the person is not working in your facility. You have no rent cost associated with this employee. They're probably working at a government site or a customer site. So you're not paying any rent, that's being provided. The 5% would cover recruiting, maybe background checks, and maybe email access and a few things like that, but it's not going to cover very much. In this, which I call the right coast method, I take the 5% times the direct labor itself of 1. And so now I've got 5 cents built in there for overhead. I also have to recover the cost of the executives in the company, the cost of the accounting people, the cost of the HR people. Well, they're not doing the work. I don't bill out a human resources person to work on this contract. So in order to pay for that person, I've got to build it into my pricing. I do that through this G&A rate. In this case, G&A is applied to all of the cost above it. So the 15% is multiplied times the 1 for direct labor, the 30 cents for fringe, and the 5 cents for overhead. So in your Excel spreadsheet calculation, you would first do an at sum to include direct labor, fringe, and overhead, close the parentheses, put times, and click on the 15%. Now, we've covered the person's pay rate, we've covered their fringe, their overhead, and their G&A. Our fully burdened cost, break even, is 1.5525 in this example. We've got to add something in there for profit, or why are we getting up in the morning? Our profit enables us to grow the company. It's coming out of profit that will allow us to get a larger line of credit so we can afford to onboard more people so we can grow. It takes profit to be able to estimate today that you're going to go after 5 different proposals in the next 6 months, and you don't know which one you're going to win or if you're going to win It's that risk factor. The fee is allowing you to have the money to be able to bid like that. In this case, I used a simple 10% fee, which would be really nice. A lot of times the fee is more in the 5 to 7 range. If it's fixed price, it could be higher. The fee is typically applied to everything above that. So here I take the 10% of the fully burdened cost and I round it a little bit. My fully burdened with fee number is now 1.7. If you will put this on your desktop in an Excel format and do it with the 30%, the 5%, the 15%, and the 10% typed in exactly like I've done it, then you have a model, a labor multiplier model. Go change the fringe to 28%. See what that does to your fully burdened with fee. Change your overhead down to 2%. Change your G&A down to 8%. Change your fee down to 7%. That's how you get the flexibility. Here's how you would use it. If you're going after kind of vanilla work that you think you're going to have all the time and it's a competitive, but it's not hugely competitive, you might want to say, well, in order to make what we ought to be making on this, we're going to bid this. You'll take it in, you'll run the proposal, somebody will say cut those costs, and then you come back and figure out how to do it. If you're trying to get into a new market, get a new customer for the first time, you're doing LPTA work, you're going to go lower than this. Next slide, Mallory. Okay, this is the wrap rate calculator. I'm giving you a little bit more information. It's the same basic spreadsheet at the top, but what I want to do again is review this the same way. You notice here at the right-hand side, I've got the right coast method. If this isn't the method that you're using, I'd have to show you the left coast method, what I'm not going into right now. Up at the top, I've got my direct labor for $1. I've applied 30 cents for fringe, 5% for overhead, 20 cents for G&A, and 15 cents for fee, so it comes up to a 1.7078 multiplier. Here's how you use it. I know that the company site billing rate is known, 85 bucks an hour. How do I know that? Somebody whispered in my ear, or I looked out on the GSA schedule at something that was competitive, or I know what we bid in the past, or I know what's on our GSA schedule, or I kind of know what the going rate is because I've been bidding this all day long for months. Somehow I decided that the billing rate is 85 bucks an hour. So I divide that 85 bucks an hour by 1.7, I can pay the employee 49.77. Doing it the opposite way, similar math. I know that the lowest point at which I can hire an employee is I got to pay them at least 40 bucks an hour to do this work, because I've done my salary surveys and I've seen what I get at 35 bucks an hour. That's not going to cut it. I take that times 1.7, 40 bucks times 1.7 is 68 bucks an hour. That's going to be my billing rate. So those are the main things that I wanted to show you in our session today. Mallory, go ahead and flip to the last slide. Next slide. Inside our information, if you want to reach me, the best way to reach me is send me a text and say, this is so-and-so from such and such a company. Here's my email, and we'll set up a time for me to call you back and answer your questions. You can't learn enough. You can't learn it fast enough, but I'd be glad to talk to you if you do have interest in this area. And Mallory, thanks so much. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That was a lot of great information, and thank you for sharing your time with us today, and thank you for everybody who joined us. If you have any questions for Jenny, like she said, send her a text, send her an email, or give her a call. And this concludes our webinar. At 12:30, we are covering debrief disclosures, what do I really get? So join us then. Thank you, everybody.